How would you feel if you got a letter from the U.S. Department of Transportation saying that your federal grant to connect your trail system has been canceled because it's hostile to motor vehicles? After you've worked for years to develop plans, build political will, apply for the grant, and move forward in reliance on that federal award letter you'd gotten. Some, including our friends in Alabama and Albuquerque, experienced that last month. Everyone with an unspent neighborhood access and equity grant lost theirs in July when Congress rescinded the program. Others have had grant elements changed, or they've simply been in limbo most of this year with frozen grants that are under review. That whiplash has been disrupting our movement, and now we face a reauthorization of the federal transportation law next year in which congressional leaders have vowed to cut programs, focus more on highways, give more power to states at a time when states talk of consolidating, that is diluting the Transportation Alternatives Program with other programs that are less established but expensive. Federal headwinds are stiff, but together we'll continue to fight to maintain and improve federal programs that benefit trail networks. But long-term success comes from partnership between local, state, and federal governments. Each level plays critical roles, and those opportunities at those levels vary by place and time. Time and again, we've seen states and localities really step up to leverage rich federal opportunities or to make up for the times when the federal government isn't delivering. This session's about the resiliency of the trails movement when it comes to finding ways forward when you know that trails and other safe places to walk, bike, and move are essential to your community's success, but easy federal solutions are harder to come by. We'll hear today from leaders from a rural state, Maine, a city, Austin, and a metro region, Greater Columbus, regarding how they've used the ballot box to create and sustain critical funding to realize their ambitious visions for a walkable and bikeable communities. There are many policy tools that you may consider to advance your work, but at a time of constrained state budgets following a decade of state legislative successes, changed federal priorities and strong public demand, RTC sees ballot initiatives as a particularly promising way to keep trail and active transportation networks moving forward. Rules vary by state, and ballot initiatives are common in some and rare in others, and about half the states allow citizens to initiate a measure, but in all states, they allow the legislature to put a measure on the ballot. In 2010, the Iowa state legislature put creation of an outdoor recreation trust fund on the ballot, and voters convincingly approved it. However, it depended on the legislature to raise the state sales tax to pay for it, and they never have, despite repeated attempts. So last year, RTC supported Iowa advocates, and we're proud to have here Luke Hoffman and Andrea Bolton, who worked on that, and we supported them in passing 2 county-level ballot initiatives to deliver the funding for trails and outdoor recreation that the state would not. We expect more counties to now follow. The resiliency of Iowa advocates to find creative ways forward inspires us. We're about to hear more stories like this from our panelists, and obstacles are inevitable. The most successful places are those that respond to obstacles by learning and trying something different until they succeed. They commit to make their trail system happen, come hell or high water. Now that large swaths of Americans are hungry for safe places to walk and bike, it's become attractive to give them the opportunity to be a decision maker. And now I have the privilege of introducing each of our panelists for a short presentation, followed by a group discussion. So first up, we have City Council member Paige Ellis, who has represented Southwest Austin since 2018. Ellis is one of Austin's leading voices on transportation and mobility, housing and affordability. She is chair of the city's Council Mobility Committee, vice chair of the Climate, Water, Environment, and Parks Committee, and a member of the Cap Metro Transportation Authority Board. In 2020, Ellis led the passage of a $460 million active mobility bond. It's the largest of its kind in Austin's history, and it funded urban trails, bikeways, and sidewalks, as well as transformative capital projects like the Longhorn Dam Bridge. Councilmember Ellis.
In 2019 and 2020, I found myself in a very unlikely position. The city of Austin was awarded a grant by a group called People for Bikes. And they said, we are going to be taking a handful of city people to the Netherlands, and we're going to ride bikes for a week. I am City Council member Paige Ellis. I've been fortunate to represent my district for 7 years on the Austin City Council and to get to serve on many boards and commissions that regard mobility and active transportation around the city of Austin. The first city that I was able to visit in 2019 was Utrecht. Then we went to Rotterdam, and then we went to Amsterdam. And I didn't know that this initiative along the way was actually going to change my entire perspective around mobility. I thought I was just going to get to ride bikes for a while, and I figured I was never going to see Amsterdam if I didn't find a different way to get there. And lo and behold, while I was on this trip, there was a proposal that came out from some grassroots organizers in Austin. The idea was to put something on the ballot, and it was all going to be focused around transportation and mobility. 2020 was also the year that Austin, Texas got to vote on Project Connect, which is a transformative light rail plan. Austin, Texas does not have light rail. We have one commuter line. We have a great bus system that is overworked. We have a lot of people that need to utilize it, but we need more ways to get around town. The city of Austin proper is 1 million people. So trying to work that many people in and out of our transit systems has become a growing burden for Austin, Texas. So when I was in the Netherlands, this harebrained idea came out of some grassroots organizers, and they said, what if, in addition to $8 billion on the bonds that we put on as Prop A, we put on a Prop B, and we add in an entirely different set of mobility infrastructure. And we dedicate it as first mile, last mile improvements. So as I'm walking around the Netherlands and biking with a bunch of transportation officials from the city of Austin, I said, what are they doing? They are going to jeopardize our entire mobility plan. We are trying to convince people to vote yes on $8 billion of property taxes. What if they pick Prop A instead of Prop B? We're going to put something else on the ballot that's much smaller and not likely to impact as many people. And someone that worked for our transportation department looked me dead in the eye and said, no, this is exactly the moment to put it on. We can have it all. We can tell people that this is the era in Austin, Texas, to be able to deliver big, meaningful projects, and that we have a vision, and if we're going to accomplish our goals, we need to go big. So on that trip, I decided that why the heck not? And that began many months of work with our local organizations to figure out what exactly that package looked like. Fortunately for Austin, Texas, we already had a lot of our mobility plans in place. As you can see, Prop B passed by 68%. It actually passed with a higher margin than the light rail plan itself, which was the one that everybody was talking about. So the Wishbone Bridge is one of those projects. What we were able to do to be creative was to look at our previously adopted plans. We had a bicycle plan, a sidewalk plan, and an urban trails plan. And we were able to work through these initiatives by picking and choosing different pieces of the bucket. So we had all of these plans already in place. It meant we had already done our community input. We had already had these adopted plans. We already had our equity overlays. We already knew exactly which types of projects we needed to do. All we needed was the dollars to get it across the finish line. And that momentum, that wind in our sails, was pivotal to getting this bond passed. So now here we are in 2025, getting to do our ribbon cuttings. I hope to be able to bike across the Wishbone Bridge in a couple of months. I think it'll be done later this year, maybe early next year. But people are very excited about these programs, and we've been able to do small improvements. We've been able to make crosswalks better, safe routes to school, Vision Zero programs, and even some preliminary engineering reports for some bridges that needed to be updated along the way. So these programs have been hugely important. Voters have approved this at a higher rate than some of the higher price tag projects that we've been trying to put into the public realm. And they are quick deployments, meaning we can get them into all parts of town so that every city council district is seeing meaningful improvements and everybody's lives are made a little bit easier by the infrastructure that's being built here. Other initiatives that this program has been able to allow for is a program that I developed called Living Streets. A lot of you may be familiar with the concept of slow streets, but I said in Austin, Texas, if you tell people we're going to make the streets slower, they're going to be so mad. So we have to find a way to rebrand it like it's healthy and organic and hippie, the way that Austin likes to be. And so we created Healthy Streets first and then developed that into a Living Streets program and have had great successes along the way. So Austin is not immune to some of the other issues that a lot of people have had. We are also dealing with the lack of federal funds coming in for previously committed projects. But being able to leverage local dollars gets us much further than relying on the state or the federal government for Texas or the United States. Thank you.
So thank you. Next, we have Pete Didisheim, who provides overall strategic management, leadership, and direction for the advocacy program at the Natural Resources Council of Maine, which is Maine's leading environmental advocacy organization. Pete works with the NRCM's advocacy staff on legislative and issue campaigns, research and analysis, lobbying, and public outreach. In 2023 and 2024, Pete led the effort to pass a $30 million Maine Trails bond, for which he received the Outdoor Industry Leader of the Year award from Maine Outdoor Brands. Pete.
Hello, everybody. I am delighted to be in a room full of trail advocates. First, thank you to all of you for the work that you do. I've been the advocacy director at the Natural Resources Council of Maine for the last 29 years. I'll describe a 2-year campaign that was very successful to protect trails in the state of Maine. Has anybody in the room been on a trail in Maine?
Yep.
Excellent. Come back. We're improving our trails. We have incredible trails in the state of Maine. We got snowmobile trails, ATV trails, hiking trails, tens of thousands of miles of trails. Almost 6,000 miles of ATV trails, more than 13,000 miles of snowmobile trails, more than 6,000 miles of hiking trails. Snowmobiling alone contributes at least $600 million to our economy. In rural parts of the state, there are many towns where their winter services are propped up by snowmobile use. ATVs also are a really important part of the economy. But Maine invests almost nothing in our trails. We get a little bit of RTP funding, like everybody else does, but we have never really had any money in our budget to invest in trails. It's all been done through private philanthropy and through land trusts. So in the fall of 2023, I developed a bill. There was a lot of support in rural communities for investing in their trails. I got 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans to introduce the bill. It was to provide a $30 million trail bond, $7.5 million per year over 4 years, managed by the state, 10% match. We launched it in early 2024 and brought it to the legislature. We built what started as a fairly small coalition of about 20 organizations. We spent a lot of time identifying effective messengers and bringing the economic message forward. And so we generated a lot of media attention through op-eds, through letters to the editor, through presentations at the community level. And over a 2-year period, we built a big tent coalition of 520 organizations, businesses, and towns statewide, including LL Bean, the State Chamber of Commerce, more than 40 motorized trail clubs, ATV, snowmobile clubs, dozens of small regional economic groups, many organizations at the statewide and the national level. And we brought some of the most effective messengers to the State House, the executive director of the ATV Maine organization, the executive director of the Maine Snowmobile Association, and we really focused on rural Republicans because they have tended not to support any bonding. But through these effective local messengers who brought the economic message forward, we were able to build support. And then there was 2 fairly significant storms that hit that caused a lot of storm damage, which really brought into focus the extent to which our trails were vulnerable and needed investment. We were able to pass it out of the Appropriations Committee. We didn't do that the first year. We kept building the coalition. We passed out of the Appropriations Committee 13-0 through the House and Senate. We got the governor to sign it. It sent it out onto the ballot. And we launched a campaign. We created a ballot question committee. These are the organizations that were involved. We raised $100,000 for a campaign budget for digital content, for bumper stickers, for website, yard signs, all the things. I'm going to cue this quick digital video, which I think you guys are going to be able to play.
Yes on 4 to support Maine trails. Our trails generate millions in economic activity, provide great places for recreation, and contribute to our Maine way of life. But they've had record levels of use and need work. Yes on 4 means $30 million for repair, improved access, and building new trails without raising taxes. And Yes on 4 will unlock additional private and federal funds. Vote Yes on 4. Support Maine's trails.
So the digital ads, we targeted infrequent statewide voters, Republican women in the 2nd Congressional District, outdoor lifestyle voters, very sophisticated targeting of those voters. The voters did approve it by a substantial margin, larger than either of the other 2 bonds that are on the ballot. Because of that digital targeting, we ended up winning in 112 towns, where the Trails bond was the only bond that passed in those towns. We had much broader distribution of support overall in the state. The initial grant period was launched and closed at the end of September. And the first round had brought in 105 proposals for nearly $17 million of funding for the $7.5 million that's available in all 16 counties. So there was a really substantial oversubscription to demonstrate the strong interest. And those awards will be released. The decisions will be made within the next few weeks. And the next round will be launched early next year. So I'll stop there.
All right, so I realized that I neglected to introduce myself at the outset. I'm Kevin Mills. I'm RTC's Vice President of Policy. And our final speaker for this panel is William Murdock, who serves as Executive Director of the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission, or MORPC. MORPC is Central Ohio's regional council for local governments that provides resources addressing transportation, sustainability, housing, and development to assist 90-member communities in planning the region's future. Working with local leaders and community committees, he leads his team in planning, collaborative partnerships, community services, and policy development. This included significant efforts in trail development through Central Ohio Greenways, Trail Towns, and the Link Us initiative. Last November, Franklin County voters approved a sales tax levy to fund public transportation infrastructure, including $60 million per year for new sidewalks, bike paths, and trails.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm so excited to be here. I'm William with the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission. We like to say that our friends can call us MORPC, so you can all call us MORPC. We're the regional council for Central Ohio, and that's the Columbus region. And if you know one thing about Columbus, you know that we are growing. We are often the fastest growing community in the Midwest. And our organization and all of our partners work to get us ready for that growth by planning for it. And we're driven by a common thread, which is we would like to grow better as we grow bigger. And that's designed to help us catch up, get ready for growth, but also address some of those long-standing gaps in our systems. And I tell you, trails and walkability and mobility are a core part of that. We are at a trails conference, and I cannot tell you how important this foundation is for us. We serve 15 counties in the Columbus region, hundreds and hundreds of miles of trails, partners like Rails to Trails, local governments, rural, urban, suburban, all working together on really building out this system. And I'd be remiss not to recognize our team member, Melinda Onstein, who leads that effort. She leads our Greenway Planning Studio. We help the region with technical assistance. We find the brightest college students and plug them into local governments over the summer to work on trails, helping communities realize that vision. And I know there's a session on trail towns. We also help communities connect economic development, community pride, being outdoors with the Trail Towns Network. We're so proud of that effort. And I tell you this because it all forms that foundation for how we're thinking about the region growing better. And the initiative that knits this together at the core, that passed last November with 57% of the vote, is called Link Us. And I want to tell you about how transformative this could be for the Columbus region. This started as a planning effort about 10 years ago when business leaders, the Urban Land Institute, Columbus, Morpsey, communities of all sizes came together and said, we're growing, but we know that if we don't plan for it, if we don't make the investments today, that growth could get in front of us. We knew that if we choose a certain way to grow, our community could get worse. Problems could be antagonized, or it could get better. And that effort was called Insight 2050, and it very quickly honed in on mobility and transportation and how housing and economic development and everything else fit into that, because frankly, our region was behind. This turned into this effort called Link Us. Link Us is an $8 billion package that Central Ohio passed, 0.5% sales tax increase for the core of the region to bring up transit, to build an entire mobility system, and it's going to be transformative. Let me tell you about the details. For this region, it overhauls transit, and frankly, the mobility system has to include all pieces of how people can safely and comfortably get around. 5 mass transit lines, 5 BRTs. The Columbus area currently has 0. 45% more transit, 8 special zones, 14 new lines. This is a complete overhaul and supercharge of how people can get around in the Columbus Metro. But what's really exciting about this, hold on, I forgot all these clickers. We're building so many corridors. Sidewalks, bikeways, and trails represent a huge part of this investment. We did the research. Over 90% of riders of our transit system walk or bike to get to it. So through lots of partnership discussions, 27.5% of that sales tax increase is dedicated to sidewalks and trails and bikeways, things that support transit. This is $60 million annually, 500 miles of sidewalks through 2050. This is a massive investment. This is equivalent to what our organization programs every year for roads and bridges. So if you think about that for a region of 2 million people, $60 million a year ongoing is going to have transformative effect. One thing that we did to get started on this was we wanted to show the community what they were going to see from a trails and sidewalks perspective. So we developed a 5-year capital plan, 83 projects for the first 5 years, $262 million. Those are the big numbers, but here's the impact on people. 140,000 more people will be within 5 to 10 minutes of transit through these investments, 150 miles in the first 5 years, 35 different jurisdictions. Most of these projects cross community borders, and this is what we're really proud of and really excited about. This is not about a one-off investment here or there. This is about communities working across community lines to fill out that map and really build this comprehensive system. And why it's so exciting for trails, this is the core of our regional trails network, and we'll advance major trails projects all across that map. And we're really excited, and we're just getting started. So looking forward to the discussion.
Okay, so now we get to have a discussion, and I want to start with the thought that building trails and making communities walkable and bikeable is popular, of course, but a lot goes into queuing up and running a successful ballot initiative. So what were the most challenging steps in your process, and what did it take to get to yes with legislators, if that was needed to get it on the ballot, and with the voters? Anyone want to volunteer to jump in? Any or all?
Sure,
of
I'll
you?
jump in.
Yeah,
I'll jump in. So
all right.
we had to do a couple of things.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, all the planning. There were a couple of state laws that we actually had to change to make this ballot initiative able to fund sidewalks and trails. Fortunately, we had business partners and small town partners pushing to make that happen. But the other biggest part of it was building those partnerships and making sure that everybody saw a piece of the puzzle that served their community. So it's pretty easy with a transit line to see the line on the map and say, well, these communities will benefit. But as we built this coalition, it became really clear that we wanted to let everybody see how they could benefit. So we literally had a multi-year effort to divide up that map that I showed, brought all the communities together and said, if we had this funding, what are your priorities? And by the way, our number one priority is for you to work together so that we're not having trails end at community lines. And that effort was incredibly intensive, but why it plays into the ballot initiative is we were able to develop those first 5 years of projects without this having been passed for sidewalks and trails, so that everyone could see on a map how their neighborhood was going to benefit, whether it was a wealthier suburb or an inner ring community or whatnot. They could see the benefit, they could see the infrastructure project, and they knew that within the next 5 years, things were going to change. And we think that definitely contributed to building support and excitement for the ballot initiative.
I can quickly build on that. So in the state of Maine, you need a 2/3 vote out of the House and the Senate in order to get on the ballot. And so even though we have a trifecta of Democrats controlling each of those chambers, we needed a very substantial Republican, very substantial rural Republican vote in both of the chambers. So our theory of winning through this campaign was entirely focused on building a big tent, as big a tent as possible coalition that really focused on rural investments for trails that matter to the residents of those communities, and to identify the messengers who had influence with their lawmakers. And in the campaign work that I do, the messenger is the message. You need to identify the individuals, and they as vectors for the message is more important than what they say. So we just spent a lot of time building a coalition with the right people in rural parts of the state to build support from Republican legislators who generally vote against all bonds.
I would say ours being handled from the local level, it really was something that we were able to decide on just with city council. There was an energy in the room when I first came into office because there was more of a pro-housing majority, and those council members were more likely to give yeses to the new people and try to support them along the way to help build that coalition that Austin had been trying to work through for many, many years. So we were fortunate to be able to just run with it, but without having those advocacy organizations ready to go. There were dozens and dozens of outdoor organizational advocacy programs that all jumped into the same boat. They created a new Austin Outside and said, we're going to do these things together and we're going to run the campaign. So really getting it on the ballot was the biggest hurdle, but getting a yes from a new council member is something that I think benefited everybody, including myself.
Yeah, thanks. So I want to go to the question of, you clearly all had substantial needs to do the infrastructure your community needs and fill all those gaps. And many existing sources of funding maybe come in not at the scale you really need to be successful. So I'm just wondering how much, and actually I believe you said it in your presentation page about going bigger. That I think that that might be a driving force for some of you. Maybe speak more to that issue of scale of funding and how that might have played into the initiative.
I've seen at the local level that trying to improve corridors and trying to change bridges that are in need of repair have a much higher price tag. So there's a lot of people that get sticker shock out of those big projects, and when you compare and contrast those to what a trail can do to benefit your life, it becomes much easier. You can say, look at what else we can get for $460 million, which is not a small price tag at all, but when you look at how many bridges you can repair with $460 million, you can't impact as many areas of town. So I think choosing something that is going to affect everyone's life and can be quickly deployed all across town is something that we have been excited to see improvements on in Austin.
Mm-hmm. Yes, as I mentioned, we invest nothing in our trails before this, and so, but we consider ourselves as a state that depends enormously on tourism. And the organizations that have been providing volunteer support on our trails are aging out. And many people had the general notion that trails just maintain themselves and build themselves, and it's self-sustaining. So there was a big education effort to get to the threshold of persuading people that this off-road infrastructure needs the same type of investment that road infrastructure gets. And so there was a change of mindset that we needed to achieve, because there's Maine is a poor state. We don't actually have the sort of resources or population of Texas or Ohio. And so they're really tight on spending. And 30 million in our state actually seemed like quite a bit for something like this. But there's also a sense of pride in our tourism economy, and so we tapped into that to help people understand that Maine actually could be one of the leading destination states for our trails, but it's going to take investment, and it's got to be sustained, and we need to build it up over time and eventually build it into our budget as an ongoing area of investment.
Right, these are great examples. Now, we had big projects before this, things like the Great American Rail Trail. We're really proud of that, the Ohio to Erie Trail. But so much of sidewalks and trails in our region depended on incremental, occasionally available funding or a really long-term vision to slowly build things out. And what makes this really exciting and really different is there was a lot of focus on lifting neighbors up and connecting people very simply with sidewalks. And the tagline was more CODA, more sidewalks, more opportunity. Because we saw in polling, we saw in focus groups that people really felt that it was important to have a fund to fix those small gaps in the sidewalk system and to fix those gaps in our trail system. Yes, the funding pays for some pretty big leaps in trails, but having a dedicated source to really hone in on those segments that get forgotten with major road or highway projects that's a game changer for us, and that's something that we haven't had before. And frankly, if it hadn't passed, we'd be still focused on that incremental, slow approach.
Thank you. So now I've got a question for each of you individually. Let me start with Paige. How does your position as a local official play into the motivation to act and your ability to lead on this issue? What advice do you have for advocates in terms of influencing their local elected officials to prioritize investing in safe places to walk, bike, and move?
My favorite question to get is, will you be our champion? Everybody wants to be on the team, right? Everybody wants to be the leader of the team or to feel like you have an important place in that fight. We're fortunate to have such a long history of advocacy in Austin about outdoor spaces, sidewalk and mobility challenges, and trails that we had a lot of organizations that were already well-versed. They already knew each other. As I told my cohorts earlier today, Austin is new to having geographic districts. For many, many years, it was an at-large system. And what you found was all your council members came from 2 or 3 zip codes. Well, guess where all of the bulk of the improvements were going in Austin? It was in those 2 or 3 zip codes. And so they had walkable neighborhoods and libraries and pools and all of the things that you would want a city to invest in. But having geographic districts all of a sudden meant you had to have a perspective of what are things like in Southwest Austin or Northeast Austin. And being able to leverage that was really helpful. Another bit of advice I would give is when people are newly elected to office, they are flooded with requests. Everybody wants to meet them. Everybody wants to become their new best friend. But that is exactly when to get in the mix because you will become our new best friend. And there are people that I love to say yes to over and over and over again because they make my work as a policymaker easier. They bring me fully developed ideas and they say, you bring it and we will be your champion. We will be the cheerleaders to help get this across the finish line. And that partnership is something that's really important and really the motivation behind being able to do big things together.
Thank you. So, Pete, you built a broad and deep coalition behind your initiative, and you were able to marshal a great deal of political will. So, how were you able to generate that political will, and how have you invested in sustaining it in the wake of the passage?
Great question. So, we created a spreadsheet that listed every possible town, economic development organization, regional chamber of commerce, trail organization, land trust, conservation organization. It was 1,000 organizations. And we had a staff person focus exclusively on reaching out to those folks to try to get them to add their name to a 3 or 4 sentence statement in support of the Trails Bond. And it was just relentless focus on building that coalition in every part of the state with every type of organization. And it started with 12 and it ended up with 520. And so building that coalition was the absolute secret sauce for success because we were able to then create a map with a dot, as you saw, of every one of the towns where there was supporters. And we have stayed engaged. One of our staffers is very involved in the implementation work, making sure that the application process has been successful. We've just sent a survey out to all of the organizations that submitted grant applications to solicit their input and recommendations for changes in the application process. We'll be meeting with the Bureau within a couple of weeks to provide these suggestions. And we have built relationships with organizations that are not traditional allies. So I spoke at the ATV Maine conference, and that was the first time they'd had an environmental advocate in the room at their annual conference. One of my strong partners through this process was the executive director of the Maine Snowmobile Association. And that was critically important for lawmakers to see. I have a lot of relationships with lawmakers. They needed to see that this was not a secret plan to get a bond that would just divert all the money to coastal and southern Maine. So staying involved through the process, including through implementation, has been important, and sustaining and maintaining those relationships and building a big coalition through a systematic effort where you're just trying to keep building it.
So, William, you pursued this initiative. It kind of impaired public transportation and active transportation, and we at RTC see a lot of promise in that pairing. But what was behind that for you all strategically in the Columbus area?
Now, when we looked at how we could grow better as we were growing bigger, the community, the coalition that we built really focused in on not just one form of transportation, be it trails or transit. We really wanted to look at that whole mobility system and make sure that it was lifting our neighbors up. I think there's some common themes here about having a coalition. The coalition said, okay, well, we need to fix those long-standing gaps in the communities that need it the most. We need to lift our neighbors up. But we also need to activate our imagination of what big things could we accomplish. And trails actually connect both of those very well. And when we looked at our trails network, we saw that there were several areas of our district that were not served by trails. And they tended to be neighborhoods of fewer resources. And that became kind of a rallying call as we were trying to rally this around transit, around trails, around sidewalks. And that coalition we built involved trail advocates, folks from the Columbus Urban League, looking at different types of neighborhood groups, churches, business leaders, making sure that everybody saw the goals that were in front of us was something that we could accomplish.
Great, thank you. Now I want to talk a little bit about the different geographies that your initiatives represented. So, yours was a statewide initiative, yours was a city, yours was a county, and Austin and Columbus are somewhat similar in size. And so, kind of, what was behind thinking of the level at which you aimed these initiatives?
Someone did a poll.
Okay.
I got on the phone with one of the consultants that typically handles ballot initiatives like this, and he said, we've already put out a poll, and we think somewhere around 400 to 500 million is probably a sweet spot. When you look at the actual dollars per month, this is where most families will decide whether they say yes or no to a ballot initiative. And so I said, let's go with 450 and see where that gets us. It ended up at 460 because we needed to add a couple other things into it. But that's really how simple the math was on doing this, because we know that the population of Austin, Texas generally supports mobility bonds and just wants to make sure they're seeing something in many different parts of town. And so it really started with a poll of, let's let the voters tell us where they might end up on this, and let's start from there and work backward.
Mm-hmm. Ours came out of the coalition that we built. Certainly COTA, our transit agency, was a big partner. City of Columbus, Franklin County, yes, many other communities. But when we looked at the need, we looked at the system that we wanted to build out, and then we looked at the types of trails and sidewalks we wanted to do. We put together the package, and then it was as simple as, well, how do we raise this money? And the available capacity we saw was in the transit sales tax in Franklin County, which was 0.5%. And I know math drives a lot of things. It was, all right, well, what could we accomplish in this plan if we could make this part of a transit and a transit supportive infrastructure package? And kudos to our partners because they rallied around that. It's in this day and time, I think it's pretty rare for a transit agency to say, you know what, take a little bit of our taxing capacity for trails and sidewalks. But that was the coalition, and they saw the connection to transit there. So it really was driven by the tool that was available, and yes, some polling and a whole bunch of focus groups.
Yeah, I took a look at all of the bonds that had passed and had not passed to get a sense of what the number might be. And interestingly, throughout the process, lawmakers kept telling me, and even the governor's staff kept telling me, and others kept telling me, why don't we just put in $10 million into the budget? And I kept telling them, no, we need a sustained funding source over 4 years, that we need to do it through a bond because we want it to go to the ballot. And we actually want the people of Maine to feel invested. I don't want it to be invisible and buried in a budget. I want this to be something that collectively we all own as something that we feel good about having passed, and then we can watch, because people were aware that they voted for it, then we can, the ribbon cuttings and the projects in communities, then helps build the enduring political support that helps us get the next bond or to build it as an ongoing revenue stream into the budget.
Yeah, so a number of you kind of mentioned the math, I'll call it the math of it. So let's just scratch at that just a little bit more. Obviously you want it to pass, so it's got to be politically palatable, but you also have a certain level of needs. Like, do you have advice for people about kind of how to come as close as possible to matching the need and the political palatability of the measure?
Well, the need is infinite, so you're trying to, it's a political calculation. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a case-by-case judgment of what do you think the political system is willing to support, because, I mean, we could have would have had a $100 million bond, and so yeah, I think it's a case by case.
I think you told me you did some testing of.
Well, I looked at what the voters had voted, what they had passed in previous bonds for a variety of different things, R&D, for investment in education, for other infrastructure. Yeah. So that's how I kind of figured out what we could do. But in terms of the overall need assessment, there's enormous need in every one of our jurisdictions.
Ours incorporated different components of the previously adopted plans. And so we had an urban trails plan, a bikeways plan, sidewalks, safe routes to school, Vision Zero. There were so many different buckets to work from. We started looking at what are the big whales in this. And one of them was a bridge that's about 100 years old that connects into Zilker Park. And for those who may not know where Zilker Park is, it's where ACL Fest happens. And it's in my district. And so when you have a bridge that was built in 1925, you have a very real need for making sure that those improvements are made. So we started with the big pieces, the capital improvements plans. We did 2 or 3 substandard streets, and then the rest of it we just divided up and said, what gets us to about 60 or 70% of plan implementation for all of these, and tried, and then looked at the geography beyond that. So it was, I guess the math always works backwards. What are we starting with, and then how do we figure out what the biggest priorities are and how we're going to work through those conversations? And then, the other piece of it was we had to get enough votes from City Council to put this on the ballot. It was out of cycle. It was on top of a light rail plan, and so we had to work very stealthily between all of those factors to make sure that people in the neighborhoods themselves could point to something on a map and say, I'm going to benefit from this.
I think what Paige said resonates with a lot of us. Our Region 2 had Vision Zero and Safe Routes to School and all of these plans, and they were just that, they were plans, and there wasn't the funding to do it. So the advice that I would share that I think we've all done, Pete did it so well, is push to make it sustainable. And that's what the coalition did for the bikeways and trails component, was making sure that there was a permanent dedicated source, because the demand is infinite, but the available projects that are ready to go and engineered, we discovered were not. And so once we identified that the need, once we pushed for a sustainable source, we had to move really quickly, because a lot of our communities had never had the luxury of actually taking that plan and developing all of the work that you need to do with engineering to get it ready to go out to bid. And so there was an additional side effort with partners to get those communities ready. But I think the advice is push for a sustainable source, because it's really hard for a community to plan to implement things without knowing that the funding's going to be there.
Yeah. So next question is, it seemed like you all maybe had a comfortable margin of victory, and I'm interested in what you attribute that to, and whether that support and it coming from the voters has given you, kind of a sense of a mandate to really move this stuff forward.
I mean, I think ours was the narrowest margin, so maybe I'll start. I'm so impressed.
Ours was a 10-point margin.
Okay,
It was
all
the
right.
largest of any of the bonds that were on the ballot. It was more than a historic preservation bond and more than an R&D bond. Part of it was the campaign we did. The digital campaign was really sophisticated and targeted. Part of it is, trails are like, mother and apple pie. It's just a really popular thing. So it was easy for us to sell it to the voters. I think we need to stay focused on it for it to to build momentum. So we don't want it to be a one-off. We are going to have to focus on educating the local lawmakers about the projects that are funded through the Trails Bond, that they can feel ownership and pride connected with it and connected with the individuals that have helped move those projects forward. Because at least in our state, it's all about relationships. So the relationships that we will continue to sustain is what will hopefully turn into momentum.
Yeah, for us, so we passed by 57%. Where we are with that mandate, I think it's exhilarating and it's daunting because what we've accomplished, the mandate we've accomplished is we have raised our residents and our community leaders' expectations that we are going to deliver hundreds of miles of trails and 5 BRT lines in the next 25 years. And that's a great problem to have, but that means we are solely focused right now on developing plans that are shovels on the ground next year, moving forward. There's a lot of work going on to it, but it's an exciting and a good problem to have.
Great. So I'm going to do our final question, which would be that many people, find that they're a bit frustrated trying to move forward. Maybe they don't feel like they get enough support from the federal level or from the state legislature, or their state DOT is not aligned in terms of priorities. So in a single word or phrase, what's your parting advice for folks about how to keep their trail visions moving forward at a good pace?
I would just say stay in the mix. There's a lot of folks that are very busy, and you have to make sure that you're constantly communicating with the people that are responsible for delivering some of these projects. I've found there's times where I have a staff contact that is just so eager and moving through at a very fast pace. I don't have to check in on them. Everything is going the way that it should. But then sometimes people get bogged down. I think there's a lot of communities and governments right now that are looking at staffing shortages, and they're doubling up the workload on one person's plate, and they're not getting the pay raise for it. And if you want to get your projects finished, sometimes you just have to be, you have to be a bugger about it. You have to kind of go through and ping people and say, I need to follow up, every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks to really make these things work. And so there's a fine line, especially with people in elected office, where you need to be visible and present. And you don't want to be a bully, but you just need to be part of their champion. Be part of their cheerleading team. And I think a lot of that goes a long way. We're just people like anyone else trying to do good work. And the more you can see folks eye to eye and meet them where they're at and keep encouraging them and pushing them along, I think the better all of these projects will come out.
Thank you.
So really focus on finding the best messengers, but really try to capture those stories of projects that people are really excited about, either because they currently exist or they want them to exist, that will help their kids, will help their seniors have access to accessible trails, that will strengthen their community, that will benefit their economy, and then figure out the ways to capture those stories in video content and other ways to build that set of stories, because people love trails. We're selling something that is a really positive thing. So it's a positive story. Just find the individuals that can bring that forward.
And trails, this audience knows this, trails are more than just trails. Economic development, jobs, outdoor recreation, health. I say that because my advice is show people how they're a part of that story, show how they connect to all of those things in addition to the great things on trails.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, panel. That was inspiring. and great to hear your theories of winning, and congrats on your success. And I think just so reassuring that when you bring this issue to the people, the power of the people, make things happen. So appreciate all that you've done. So welcome to the home stretch of the TrailNation Summit here. Who's feeling energized? Who's feeling tired? It's possible to feel both at the same time, I can tell you that. But we still have a full afternoon of master classes and mobile workshops. But this is our last time together here all in one room. I will say, unless you follow the advice of County Executive Chris Ronayne, who said, to fully experience Cleveland, you have to be here for another week. So you could also extend your stay a few more days, and then we can have time together. But I mean, that's one thought, I think, in terms of how we put this together. It's about staying, and it's about staying power. And I go to a lot of conferences. I love going to conferences. I find that I meet interesting people. I learn a few things, and then I go back home, and I kind of just go back to what I was doing before. I might have some good notes. I put them on a shelf, and I don't have the discipline necessarily to fully incorporate. So what we've tried to do here, I hope it is, you felt it, is have some staying power in this gathering to help folks connect in ways that you really, when you go home, you maintain those linkages to collectively advance your work with new partners, and through the workbook and other ways that you have made some commitments, some ideas that you can then really implement when you're back home. There's no quiz on the workbook, I promise, but I do hope it's useful. So just a couple of quick last thank yous. Thank you again to our sponsors. Thanks to each of you who supported this effort. We really, really appreciate your investment. It wouldn't be possible without all the generous folks. We've heard from some of them. You can see all of their contributions out in the hallway. So sponsors, thank you so much. It was a huge team of RTC staff, RTC board that contributed. Thanks to all RTC board and staff. A couple specific thank yous to the staff that are wearing the bright green lanyards. First to Liz Thorstensen, our Vice President of Trail Development. It was Liz's genius for the World Cafe and the Pitch Fest and a lot of these other creative things that we did. Big thanks to Brandy Horton, our Vice President of Communications, who really added to the degree of seamlessness and professionalism and all of the wonderful experiences people had. Thanks to Eric Oberg, our Senior Director of Programming. Thank you, Eric. Who added his vision and his brilliance to how we planned this. Finally, so you saw Eric, you saw Liz, you saw Brandy at different points. There's one person that wasn't up on stage but had as big of a role, and that's Mary Ellen Kuntz, who is right there. Mary Ellen is the lead of the TrailNation Collaborative. Thanks for all that you did to make this possible. And I have two asks for you, and the first one is relates to all that Mary Ellen does. But when you leave, if you are not a member of the TrailNation Collaborative, please join. It's a 10,000-member national group that comes together virtually until now, but learns from each other about how to advance trail networks. There's something called the TrailNation Playbook. We put down all of what we've learned into making trail networks. It's a chance to learn from that, not repeat our mistakes, make new mistakes, but collectively advance the work together. And then the second ask I'd have of you is to take early steps in mobilizing, taking action around these important federal programs that we talked about that we need to preserve and strengthen. We're just getting started. Honestly, it's kind of, you might say, a simmer that will go to a boil as the months advance. But let me give you the first one, and that is to contact your member of Congress and let them know that they should oppose the anti-rail banking bill, the bill we've talked about very specifically that allows for rail corridors to be put into public use. That one, members of Congress need to know that it should not advance. It's not good for people or communities. And if they care about those things for their constituents, they should oppose it. So you have on many of your tables fact sheets. take a look at those. Those will tell you more behind the bill. And then the action to take would be to go to our website, railstotrails.org/reauthorization. You'll get all kinds of information on that and other pieces, and then contact your member of Congress. Encourage them to oppose this. That's the first step. We see all of you as part of that coalition that we're going to be building and building to both play defense of our programs and play offense to get more. We heard that the need is almost unlimited, so let's make sure we get close to meeting that. Finally, thanks to all of you. Thanks to all of you for joining. Thanks for all that you do for trails. You know, this work is about infrastructure, but it's really about people. And the chance to be here with you in community, to connect with you in person, has been one of the highlights for me of the whole year, maybe past years. So it's just a joy to come together. I hope you all made new connections, and I hope you all are renewed in serving the people of our communities and our neighborhoods.